And with me now, Wyoming Republican Senator John Barrasso. Senator Barrasso, please indulge us because we are all in mourning for the tree, the tree that we've lived with for all of these years on the White House lawn. Well, actually, that's been there since the founding of the Republic, I think. But let's talk about the deficit and whether or not the Republic is going to survive this deficit summit and the default showdown. Republicans have said that it has to be revenue neutral. If they agree to any loophole closures, that overall it has to be revenue neutral. At the same time, your fellow Wyoming resident, Al Simpson, and of course Erskine Bowles, laid out a very aggressive outline for future deficit reduction, which did include significant taxes down the road. It doesn't have to be triggered immediately while the recovery is still, sort of limping along. What is your position on taxes and where we go at this deficit summit?
Well, thank you, Andrea. I just came out of a meeting of the Republican Senate leadership, and I spent the 4th of July with Al Simpson in his backyard in Cody, Wyoming. I think with 14 million Americans looking for jobs, can't find someone to hire them, the wrong thing to do is to raise taxes on anyone in economic times like this. Our problem is not that we're taxed too little, it's that Washington spends too much, so we need to cut the spending, cap the spending, and the president talks about a balanced approach. We need a balanced budget, and the way to do that is with an amendment to the Constitution.
But, Senator, I just came from a Bloomberg breakfast with David Plouffe, and their point is that the deal has to include tax measures. It has to be balanced. It has to. He's not saying what the proportion has to be, but that there has to be a serious entitlement cuts, real deficit reduction there, and there have to be some kind of tax measures that are in the long run positive on cutting into the deficit, not revenue neutral. Now, we're not talking about immediately, but over the course of 10 years. Is that absolutely a non-starter as far as you and the Republican leadership, you've just come from that meeting, are concerned?
The way to increase revenues in this country is to get people back to work. With 9.1% unemployment, the best thing we can do to increase revenue is to get our economy going in a vibrant and robust way. That's the best way to increase revenue. And raising taxes, to me, is the way to not do it. I mean, if the patient is sick, you say raising taxes is the right medicine, and I just don't think it is.
We're not talking about raising rates, Senator. We're talking about potentially going back to the Clinton-era tax rates and eliminating the Bush tax cuts on the high earners. Is that also a non-starter down the road? Not immediately, but in 2 or 3 years.
Well, even the president at Christmas time said that was a non-starter. But Bill Clinton even came out this past weekend and said our corporate tax rates are too high. They're affecting our competitiveness as a country. And we need to become more competitive to be able to become more innovative at home, more competitive overseas. And I agree with President Clinton. If we would lower corporate tax rates, and then they can do the things to eliminate significant numbers of various tax deductions, but you have to lower the tax rates, and that's the way you're going to spur the economy and then increase tax revenues.
Well, I was with the Senator Bill Clinton when he spoke at a conference this weekend, and he said that President Obama should not blink on the subject of getting taxes somehow into the mix in a larger budget deal, not a short-term deal, but a larger, long-term deficit reduction deal.
Well, I think that Chuck Todd is right that a larger deal is easier to do than a smaller deal. I think that's the sort of thing that we ought to be doing, and I'm hoping that that comes out of the White House discussions tomorrow. I'm always optimistic about the future of our great country, and I'm looking forward to the results tomorrow, but I ought to be working on something big, not just nibbling around the edges. The president last week, Andrea, 6 times in his press conference mentioned taxes and corporate jets. Realistically, for every $100 of the president's deficit, that's worth 2 cents out of the $100. As Charles Krauthammer said, it'd take 5,000 years at the rate that they're going to make those taxes to just deal with 1 year of the president's deficit. So the president ought to really talk about things in responsible ways, not just this little 2 cents worth and nibbling around the edges. These are big problems, and we need a big solution.
Senator John Barrasso, thank you very much.